as the effects of the coronavirus crisis continue to ripple out to our personal relationships, our ability to meet our basic needs, one area that has been altered in an extreme way is obviously global trade. It's easy to think much closer to home at a time like this, but today we'll hear from Lori Wallach about why we should be thinking about these global economic relationships as well. Lori Wallach is the director of Public Citizens Global Trade Watch, a 25-year veteran of congressional trade battles, starting with the 1990s fight over NAFTA. She was named to the Politico's 50 list of thinkers, doers, and visionaries transforming American politics in 2016 for her leadership in the Trans-Pacific Partnership debate. That's where we first met, when I was covering the TPP, and it was really nice to have a voice, of reason and sanity for the workers and the environment. And I'm glad I got to meet you during that time. Where do we start, Lori?
Well, certainly the COVID-19 crisis has made people much more aware of the stupidity, the fragility, the direct impact of our current system of globalization, which in technical terms, we hear about how supply chains are too thin or are brittle. What that means practically is, for instance, China is a sole source for all kinds of medicine that we all rely on. So if and when there is a severe health crisis in China, the implications here on us being able to get the things that we need are dire. And this is before all of the current border closings and decisions by different countries, reasonable to, if they make something, to make sure that their citizens have access to the thing that's made in their country. But a lot of my friends in the environmental movement have been arguing for, a decade that just to limit the carbon impacts of trade, we need to be having redundancy and more localization, not that you have a factory that makes a mask for germs in every state, but rather regionally. I mean, we're a continental sized country. For our country to be so dependent for so many crucial things, infrastructure obviously came up first. So, when we've had bridge failings and we've had to wait for weeks to get that iron beam sent from Brazil or from China. But now it's very personal, because everybody is running around trying to figure out, where do you get these things that you're being told you need, even things like hand sanitizer, and the supply chains. Folks need to think about it. It's not just the actual sanitizer. It's who makes that plastic container, who makes the spring that goes in the squishy thing that's on the top of the plastic container. And we are so, when people say supply chains are brittle, it means they're too much sole sourcing and too much distance. And this crisis is showing folks that
sole sourcing, meaning it comes just from one company, makes the little spring.
Or one place. There's a cluster of companies in one place.
That is really interesting. Governor Cuomo here in the state of New York just started making hand sanitizers at the local prisons. Well, he didn't, but he's starting to do that. He's also starting to help us, New York State, produce its own tests. How hard would it be to actually come back around to more local production and local sourcing? And would that be, it seems like that would be good for the environment and good for workers. Are your thoughts that there might actually be some potential positives in terms of trade that could come out of this coronavirus if we open up our eyeballs and learn?
I don't know that I would call it positives. I'd say I would just like more awareness that folks are impacted in ways they're not clear about until there is something that disrupts their day-to-day activities in a way that makes them think about, wait a minute, why? In a country the size of the US, with an economy the size of the US, do we not make N95 respirators? So that's, the mask with the little round thing on the side that is the honest to God, you can wear it in surgery. It blocks everything. It's not just the paper things that people are wearing, which, folks, that will help you from giving it to someone else. that's not going to stop you if it's airborne, which we don't know enough to know if it is, to stop it from coming in. So those, the real honest to God, they call them a respirator. It's not attached to oxygen on your back or something, but it's technically called a respirator. Those are the ones that get used in hospitals. They're made in China. It's the sourcing is several companies, but solely in China. That's ludicrous. We in the U.S., I mean, in other countries, if you're Singapore and you're a small country, you've got a bigger problem as far as being able to not have these kind of shortages. But in the U.S., we have all of the natural resources even to make that. We have petroleum for the plastic. We have wood for the paper, trees for the paper. And we have the capacity to make plastic and paper. So we could, is the answer.
But what are we lacking, Lori? We're lacking trade policy that encourages companies to keep the jobs in the country. What are we lacking?
Well, looking at it from a longer term, not crisis moment, yes, we're lacking the trade policy. We're also lacking just the philosophy, the intent. I mean, perhaps this crisis will shift some of that because it's a battle between what is probably best for the public interest and what's profitable. So for a company that, wants to maximize their profits, we're not all thinking about it, but if it's a quarter, a penny a mask, cheaper to have it made in China because of the wages, because of the environmental, and I'm netting that out as a quarter of a penny because it still costs more to ship it back here. If you make a gazillion masks, that's your profit there is going to be bigger if you make them there. But if there are other incentives just for folks to think about the question of, can we do it? Yes, we can. Okay, how? And then if there are rules about some things needing to be made closer home, be they trade rules or for that matter, domestic rules. So for instance, there was on Friday a letter sent to the president by 57 House Democrats calling on the use of what's called the Defense Production Act. The Defense Production Act, DPA. You'll hear more about that in the coming days, I am certain. That's a 1950s era law that allows the government, the president by declaration, to basically give tax credits, put money into help get equipment, use a military plane to bring a big, industrial machine to have quick gearing up of domestic needs. And it's not just, it sounds, defense production, you think missile, but it's everything. It's everything we need for defense, for security, for homeland defense. And so that law, for instance, I'm just thinking, I'm a little obsessed with those masks. That's the most boneheaded thing in the world that we don't make those. So, literally, if there's a machine maker in Germany that makes the machines that make the masks that now are selling them to China, under the Defense Production Act, they could send a military cargo plane to Germany. The government could buy the equipment, so no financing questions, very quick, put it on the military plane, have it back here, give it a week to get installed and set up. And you could start production in a couple of weeks. The equipment would still be under this act. The equipment is basically owned by the government, leased to the manufacturer, but they end up with the responsibility to, when called upon, produce for the government. And then, so that law, for instance, is in place. It doesn't require anything. It's a mystery to me why Mr. Authority Grabber Trump hasn't used that to, start producing everything.
Can you give us a little bit of just a kind of a little bit of a rundown of where we are in terms of how the coronavirus has affected global trade at this point? And obviously the markets are crashing. I'm assuming there's a connection between the two.
There's not actually so much of a connection between the markets crashing and trade, actually. So trade is down, and the trade was down way before the market crashed because, China's 2 months ahead of us in the cycle of this virus. So because we have so many imports from China, we have such a ginormous hundreds of billions of dollars a year trade deficit, we started seeing imports slow down because finally in China, they just shut down production once they got serious about it. So the impact on trade has been, there have been less imports from China, but increasingly from other countries too now. I'm sure that the next month's trade data is going to show a huge dip in Europe. We already had seen a dip from China in the previous month's trade data, but that is unrelated to the stock market. The stock market situation is basically that the president can own that basically, because that is what happens when you have traders with no information and a lot of uncertainty and the government not doing jack. about what looks like a huge crisis. I caught myself without saying the second half of that. Um,
Appreciate
the
that.
yes, the stock market prices have to do with what happens in trading each day. So yes, if trade is down for certain companies, that is an issue. For most companies, that's not an issue, and certainly not in a month by month basis. And to the extent trade vulnerabilities or trade uncertainties were priced in, as people say, to the stock, that would have happened a couple years ago when the China tariffs went into place. So that's not the biggest part. The biggest part of the stock market is traders are looking at the fact they have no idea what is going to happen. They don't have the basic information about how serious it is. They don't know. They saw, for weeks, the government absolutely, the federal government not reacting in any kind of serious way. The lack of information and the lack of action turns into basically sell, 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 and it puts down prices.
We're speaking with Lori Wallach of global trade. Well, it's um,
Global economics.
right, global economics. Thank you very much. I've got a lot of things going on here. We have people in the chat putting in some questions and some comments. Sourcing Support says we should all be concerned about the liability waiver M3 is getting from Congress for their masks. M3 had a multi-billion-dollar payout for their failed earplugs, which were used by U.S. soldiers. That's a quote there. And I'm happy if you wanted to jump in and make a comment, that's fine too. We also have questions coming in. Shaggy Tufang, the pandemic is a doozy. Usually during a downturn, we have at least a few major countries that can tug us along during the hard times. When the whole world stops, how do we jumpstart a locomotive that is dead on the tracks?
So I think there's just a lot unknown. I think there's an enormous amount unknown. I mean, what clearly is the case is that part of, yes, the whole world is shut down, but part of what's not going away is demand. It's just the ways in which we would, express demand are basically being stopped. So we can't go to restaurants, we can't go to movies, we can't go out to clubs. There are a lot of things we would normally be.
Amazon's not delivering anything but like groceries and pharmacy stuff anymore.
The basic ways in which our consumption drives the economy is going to resume once we're in a position to be able to continue those activities, certainly in the service sector. Also, just consumption of non-essentials. The real economy, what real people are doing, will pick back up because then you'll need production for that. I can't speak to the situation, for instance, with the stock market and at what point the investors, who are not the real market, the real economy, they are speculation and thinking about what will happen in the future and bidding on that. It's hard to know what will happen there. But as far as the basics of the real economy, we don't have destruction of the means of production, for instance. We don't have things getting bombed flat and, oh my goodness, when this war is over, we won't have any auto factories or whatever. We have basically urgently sequestered demand.
What's the
So
deal
it's
with the
a very big
toilet paper?
deal.
I know this is a question I wanted to. Does the toilet paper shortage have anything to do with global trade?
I'd like to blame it on global trade. But alas, I think it has to do with people assuming that somehow, I'm trying to think of how
I think people believe that all toilet paper comes from China, and therefore, with the flu, trade will be halted. There have been reports of, cargo ships not being let into port, not just with toilet paper, but with other goods and goods on board, and they're just afraid that there will be literally, pardon my pun, a run on toilet paper.
Yes, well, let me assure people their bums are safe because there is in fact production in the US, a lot of production in the US. So fear not. That is one supply that we definitely can make for ourselves right now.
Could a crisis like the COVID crisis permanently affect the trade relationships that are happening between countries?
I think it depends how long it lasts. It's not like it will do something to the relationships. Rather, does it change the thinking in different countries about how dependent they want to be for certain essential goods and needs on far-flung sources. So for some countries that are small and or haven't the natural resources to be able to produce for themselves, they don't really have an option. For a country like the US, I think, apropos of your first question, if we all do our work and think about this and talk to our elected officials about this, we can and we should take this lesson into how we ought to proceed going forward. And, just there are concrete things that can be done. So Trump's tax scam is bad in general, but in addition, it promotes the outsourcing of production. It has a tax rate for companies earning income out of the country that's half, it's 10%, compared to the 20% corporate tax rate for the exact same toilet paper company. If they're making those rolls in China, their profits are on US taxes 10%. If they're making it here, it's 20%. Or they added more expenses you could deduct for outsourcing, not just the one that already was there, which was ridiculous and should have been reversed, which is all the expenses for outsourcing jobs and production from the US offshore get deducted as business costs. Great, let's incentivize people leaving. But in addition, the tax scam that Trump did added being able to deduct a percentage of the entire investment cost. So you actually make money by moving your money into producing someplace else.
Do the working class voters who voted for Trump know that he did this and how it's going to affect them? Do you have any idea about that?
I'm very disconcerted.
Trying to get the word out here, but
I'm very disconcerted to say that from the focus groups and the polling, from the focus groups we've done and the polling I've seen that's more recent than our focus groups, there is to a large degree an unwillingness to think about the results. People who have been hurt by trade, working class people who've been hurt by trade, are so keen on the fact that someone has finally effing done something, is how they would say it. And these are super smart.
Doesn't matter what the something is, even if it's not going to help.
These are super smart people. I have to say, Democrats have painted themselves, not we. Democrats have painted themselves into this damn corner. They created the opportunity for Trump to do what he did and win those Midwest states on trade, because it was Clinton who did NAFTA and the World Trade Organization and the China WTO deal and the China bilateral deal. That set of policies is what's cost 5 million US manufacturing jobs. It's devastated swaths of the country, and people know it. Smart people. They are not, I don't believe they can't figure out what's being done to them. No, they saw those agreements and they saw what was done to them, and they blame Clinton. And we saw when they didn't turn out for Hillary Clinton. Then they saw Barack Obama come in and double down with the TPP. So NAFTA.
Yeah, I got to say, I was kind of happy that Trump didn't do the TPP.
Well, and
that's my guy on this. Okay.
You saw in 2016, the cabinet officials from the Obama administration in the fall of the election year, they weren't out campaigning for Hillary. They were out literally in Wisconsin, where I'm from, and I was on leave working on the election. I'm running into news reports of cabinet level folks in small towns in Wisconsin where they're getting all the news for 3 days because it's a very big deal, pushing TPP, not pushing Obama. So for a lot of those counties in Wisconsin that flipped, they're like the places that the Obama administration folks were selling TPP right before the election. So that basically Democrats, when somebody like a right-wing populist, faux populist, but making those arguments, then started talking the talk, that was so appealing. That just grabbed people's heartstrings. And you can come back now. I mean, you can say to them, hey, folks, the new NAFTA, not going to bring back jobs, not even going to stop all the outsourcing, may slow it down. Look, the big three auto producers, they just decided to put the Chevy Blazer plant in Mexico. And look, since NAFTA, they decided to put the new Ford Mustang made in Mexico. Hey, there's never been a Mustang made in Mexico. Don't get your hopes up too much. It might stop some of the damage. It's not going to fix things. And people say, you just must hate Trump. And I say, well, I'm just trying to talk about what, I never say his name. I'm trying to talk about what the reality is. Hate him or love him. Let's just talk about what we need to do in trade policy. And folks immediately get defensive.
Lori, from the chat, we have Shaggy Fang says Trump was supposed to bring manufacturing back to the U.S., but when his daughter gets 18 copyrights for Chinese-made products, you'd think the MAGA mob would smarten up a little bit.
Well, here's the reality, though. There has been a growing trend of manufacturing jobs that started in the last 2 years of the Obama administration. And it has continued through Trump. The curve is basically at the same angle. But the reality, people, the MAGA mom and people all across Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania know is up until the COVID crisis, there were more manufacturing jobs.
Mhm.
Firms were hiring. There were second shifts. And it started in the last 2 years of Obama. It's not something that Trump suddenly made manufacturing jobs come back. It had to do with the growth in the economy. It had to do with demand, and it was happening well before him. But the lived reality is Obama didn't talk about that very much, didn't talk about manufacturing and trade in a way that resonated for the concerns that working class folks in the Midwest had. Trump's talking like, he's done all of this. He hasn't. But that rhetoric connects to their lived experience of, there are more jobs. And people aren't thinking like, oh, yeah, the second shift, though, started in 2014. They're just thinking like, oh, look, there are more jobs.
So has Trump actually stopped trade with other countries around the virus?
No, not specifically stopping trade with other countries around the virus. There is no, there are no like new trade restrictions. And in fact, though, the one good cabinet official in the whole administration, the trade representative, Bob Lighthizer, early on, before really the administration had an all administration approach, lifted the tariffs on the China trade cheating sanctions that had anything to do with medical stuff.
Mhm.
So 3 weeks ago, they started listing, their penalty tariffs for subsidies and for different trade, basically enforcement cases. And the U.S. tariff started lifting the tariffs on all those things just to make sure to maximize supply.
Can you talk a little bit about what advice would you give the Trump administration on how they should go about trade relations at this time?
Basically, they need to not be focusing on trade relations at this time. They need to be focusing on the national and the public health emergency. So they need to use the Defense Production Act to start making the things we all need to stay safe and that hospitals will need. How, I don't know. I'm sure it's very complicated. What does it take to make ventilators?
Hmm.
So obviously we're going to have a shortage if we, look anything like the kind of crush of people who need artificial ventilation. That is the machine that helps you breathe, unlike the respirator, which is the thing you put over your mouth to make sure you're not breathing in bad germs. The ventilators that we have, if we have a huge crush of folks in the ICU for breathing problems, we don't have enough. Why aren't they using the Defense Production Act to right now, where they've got maybe 10 days before that crush in the potential timeline could hit us, to start thinking about how they're going to gear that up? Similarly, for companies that make a variety of things that could go into the things you need to put the testing together. So there's the question of the testing kits themselves, the chemical compounds, et cetera. But then there are things like the cotton swabs and all the other things, the vials, all the things you need. We should be focusing on, if not importing those, making those, because depending on how long this lasts, other countries' imports are going to dry up because they're not making stuff. So the stuff that's not already in the warehouse that can be sent is not going to get made.
Oh, that's terrifying. Lori, that's
It
terrible.
depends how long it lasts. We don't know. But, precaution's the best way to go.
Mhm, mhm. Well, as the crisis continues, what should we be looking out for in terms of global trade beyond? I think you may have just answered that question, but beyond that, what should we be looking out for?
I think that a lot of people are going to be more aware of things that are traded. So, we have a huge trade deficit. So many things that you may not be, maybe your viewers are, but the general person going into a store is not aware of where things come from. if certain things, if in fact this crisis continues and it lasts for months and the economies are closed down and countries are sequestered, we're going to see less of the things that we normally import. And it's going to make people more aware of the fact that we import a lot of stuff. So, there's not going to be a shortage of food. There's not, your water, like the things you need to live. But there may be things that you usually expect to be able to find readily in a store that you're not going to find. And the thing that's more worrying is things that are supply chains in, for instance, medical and hospital equipment. Can we make replacement parts for things? And again, ginning up production of things like masks, et cetera. Those are things that we are lucky in the US, because you say it's scary. It is scary. But folks, think about this. We have the capacity to deal with this if we need to. And there will be months in transition where we would be trying to gear up to do it. If you are a person in a small developing country like in Central America, where you haven't the natural resources or the capital or the machinery to be able to retool and be able to do this stuff, if you are in a country that is like Singapore, where there is no farming, so you're totally reliant on imports for food. Those are issues we're very blessed not to have to face. Our neighbors, Canada and Mexico, don't have to face those. But in other parts of the world, there, are much bigger challenges than the prospects that we face.
If we're not, you just gave me a great idea. I'm always looking for silver linings here. But if we're not able to, say, get the metal that is required to make the little spring in our hand sanitizer pumps, is it possible we won't be able to make things like, weapons of war? And therefore, we won't be able to put those in the hands of people who are maybe doing terrible things with them. Is it possible that that global trade and the effect of the coronavirus might actually have the effect of slowing down the arms industry? I'm looking for a silver lining, Lori.
That I'll think about that.
Okay, come back and let me know.
Also, folks, it really depends also how long this goes, right? The things I'm talking about are things that would be relevant if we're stuck in a quasi, closed down state for months. If
I hope not. I have a very small apartment.
Well, the other thing to think about is if, as we're thinking about right now, what does trade mean? A thing for everyone to think about also is just, how do they stay connected to what's going on outside for politics? Because,
watch this.
Yeah, no, but the thing that I'm much more worried about than what happens with our trade flows during this crisis is what happens with our presidential election cycle. Like that is some exchange that in the short term really has major implications as compared to the trade implications in the short term. Relative to the other things we have to worry about, I'm not in a panic about those. Maybe we have some teachable moments here. But we're talking trade, and we were originally, but 2 weeks ago when we booked this, we were going to talk about the presidential candidates.
I know. But now there's only two.
And they're number one, there's only two, but also, number two, no one's really thinking about it. And it's very relevant because I hope those are allergies.
Yes, I don't know what they are. I hope so too. I'm already sequestered, so there's not much more to worry about here.
But folks you can basically stay connected while staying socially distanced, is my point.
You're right. We were going to talk about the presidential election, or the Democratic primary. Your thoughts on the Sanders v. Bernie situation that we find ourselves in right now?
Well, there's definitely a distinction between the two of them on their trade policies. It's pretty dramatic. The question to me, given, Biden keeps winning primaries, Arizona last night, for instance, the question to me that's really the most important, thinking about the general, is has the Biden-Clinton wing of the Democratic Party, which I'll just for shorthand contrast to say the Sanders-Warren wing, has sort of that set of Democrats recognized the enormous political perils. Skip the policy issues. All they have to do is own up to the political perils of continuing the trade language, rhetoric, and policies that they have supported. So heaven forbid that Trump and Biden down the road, just guessing how that's going to look, are in a debate. And Trump says, Joe Biden, you voted for NAFTA, you voted for China going into the WTO. Okay, Biden did. Biden can either say, which he should, in retrospect, that was a mistake. That was not what I was signing up for. The outcome has been totally unacceptable. America, I promise you, I have learned from that. And my trade agreements are going to put people on the planet first. That model has got to go. That's one thing Trump and I can agree on. But the way he's trying to fix it isn't going to fix all the problems that I'm going to try and fix, because I'm going to do X, Y, and Z better. He has to say that. The other way he could go, though, is Trump, you can't cut off the world. Most consumers are outside the US. We should go back to the TPP. That's like the end. Like you can see
we can't vote for him. Oh no, that's terrible.
Well, you can see, a lot of the people who are his advisors are the people who, Mike Froman, my law school classmate, very smart guy, the guy who was the chief engineer of the TPP, unrepentant about what a catastrophe it is that we're not in the TPP, and he's one of his top advisors.
Lori, we have to keep making the case about how the TPP would have made this worse. Why don't we, this coronavirus thing, why don't we, because everyone is corona crazy right now, so why don't we put out some information about how the TPP would have made this worse, which I'm sure it would have.
Absolutely. The thing with the TPP is the way it was written, it would have made us even more reliant on China trade, because the story was it's our rules versus China. But the way it was written, actually, it basically promoted Chinese goods coming in duty free by having what are called very low rules of origin. So you could basically count something as coming from Malaysia, but really it was mainly Chinese content. So it would have made us even more reliant on Chinese imports. But just back on the Biden versus Bernie, I'm hopeful that the Biden people have gotten the lesson, that they're not going to go on message number 2 and try and double down on an old failed agenda and not try and defend stuff that didn't work. They need to take this issue away from Trump if they want to win, because for a lot of people in the Midwest, it's very relevant. It's a lived experience. And it basically is something people, who are thinking about their day-to-day lives need to hear, that the Democrats have learned. Now, by the way, it's not like just the Democrats did it. Both Bushes are complicit as well. I mean, it was Daddy Bush who negotiated the crappy NAFTA that Clinton passed. It was Bush too who did CAFTA and about 10 other of these, bilateral agreements that sum up and increase the trade deficit. It's been a bipartisan presidents doing trade agreements from below hell. And so then you have Trump come in and say, I'm going to break with all the agreements from below hell. And he's painting as if he's speaking as if he's fixed everything, which he hasn't. But Biden can't come in and say, back to hell, back to hell, back to hell 2020. Yeah. He's got to admit that was a problem and move on.
Well, I don't see that happening. I guess we'll see. I hope so.
There's some smart people around him.
Here's my question.
Is hearing from people across the country.
Back to trade. I'm very upset about the following. Will I be cut off from my supply of imported Italian Parmesan cheese? Because this is something I cannot deal with.
In that regard, I would suggest you hoard.
Yeah, you think so? I think so too. I looked at some of the hoarder sites or the prepper sites. They said, if you can buy cheese already in the mold and it'll stay good forever. And I'm like, that's going to cost $1,500 for a wheel of really good
Parmigiano Reggiano. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think that, I don't want to advertise for hoarding. I'm not trying to promote hoarding, but I do think that those are the kinds of things that if this lasts for months, you're going to see imported foods, and you're going to see things that we sort of know are imported as compared to the things we know are imported, that if you are going to expire without a particular Australian wine or a Reggiano, then I would go, wash thoroughly, go out, one don't touch anything, come back, wash thoroughly, disinfect your bowels and your cheese, and and make a store. But
Oh,
the things that we don't realize are important are the things where I think likely we're going to, be surprised, because there are going to, just things, that batteries, I mean, all kinds of things that we need that we don't realize, that we could see more of how reliant we are.
Lori Wallach, thank you so much for joining us. You can find Lori on Twitter at Wallach, Wallach, Lori, Lori. And we'll be following the work. Thanks for the work that you do to keep up the good fight.
Thank you very much. And for folks who want to follow how all this is affecting trade, but also what we can be for to try and fix these problems, we have a new campaign that we're just starting, and it is Rethink Trade. And it basically is about what we want to have as compared to where we are and how we can get there. Because so much of what we think of trade, as this discussion shows, affects all the elements of our daily lives. So tradewatch.org is our website, and sign up for updates.
Wait
Thanks
a
so
minute.
much for having me
I
on.
want to know what it is that we're out of time, but I want to know those questions. That's the question I want to know.
Sign up to Rethink Trade.
Okay, we'll do that. Thank you so much, Lori, and we'll have you back again and we can continue these conversations. I appreciate it.
Wonderful. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.